Morning and welcome to the 2025 Gartner CFO and Finance Executive Conference. We are thrilled to welcome 1,200 CFOs and finance leaders from across the globe.
Now, this year so far has been tumultuous. You already know that. So let me try to catch your attention this morning with something you may not know. That 9 out of 10 CFOs are responding to the current economic environment in the wrong way. See, what we're going to show you this morning is that there are major changes coming to finance, who we are and how we operate. And what we really want to offer you this morning, if anything, is the courage to embrace this brave new world. And in case the courage we offer isn't enough, liquid courage will be served with lunch. Now, this current economic environment that we're facing is complicated. There's a lot of ambiguity, volatility, complexity that you're all facing. In fact, there's so much of it that earlier this year at Gartner, we introduced the Executive Confidence Barometer to help you all understand how your peers are recalibrating their top-line growth assumptions in the face of this current economic environment. As you can see from the data here, you executives here in Europe are a bit more worried about the headwinds from tariffs. And if you know the Americans, well, you'll know that we're a pretty optimistic lot, though even these numbers are troubling by American standards. In fact, they're so troubling that 74% of executive teams are recalibrating their growth expectations downwards. And when you take all companies together in our sample size, on average, organizations are recalibrating their top-line growth expectations down by 8 percentage points. Now, Mallory, when we see these kinds of economic environments, what do CFOs typically do?
Sure, the CFOs we talk with day in and day out have a pretty classic playbook. When uncertainty mounts, we bring the planning horizon in close and we control what we can. We call this identity a guardian CFO. And if it feels familiar, that's because for so many of us in this room, this is the foundation of our identity in the enterprise. And with good reason, right? Read some of these headlines. When uncertainty is high, the pressure is on every single one of us in this room to meet margin targets and SG&A levels for our investors. Our boards are asking us weekly, monthly, daily, how we are protecting the organization from downside risk. But this is where the research gets really interesting. We take this approach because we feel it's safer. We feel like it protects the organization. But it actually, in fact, has the opposite approach. There are clear downsides that come from a guardian identity. It breeds short-term thinking. It can create a dangerous to fail culture. And it starves key growth bets at exactly the moment we may most need them.
So you remember a moment ago when I tried to catch your attention? Well, here's your proof. 93% of organizations report at least one of these unintended consequences in their enterprise when we as CFOs behave like a guardian. That's right now. 9 out of 10 of you might be doing this to your organization. Now, of course, what does a guardian fundamentally do? If we were to summarize it, well, they protect the status quo in their organizations. Sometimes that status quo is beneficial, but what we want to show you here in a moment is that we believe the status quo you're trying to protect is now dead.
So where's all of this headed? Whenever we face moments of uncertainty, what we do at Gartner is we try to study the trends and the patterns we see. We've spoken with hundreds of organizations. We reviewed their strategic plans over the past several months, and we've identified 8 forces that are fundamentally reshaping who we are in finance and who we're going to be in the next 5 years. These forces are technological, they're regulatory, and they're organizational in nature. Clement and I are going to walk you through each of them. The first trend is we are seeing the end of transactional customization. In fact, most of the companies we looked at are moving towards automating most, if not all, of their transactional processes. Now, most of the CFOs I talk with are not upset about this. In fact, they see it as an opportunity to be putting time and effort towards things that matter most. A CFO from a wine and beer provider commented to me that people don't drink their organization's alcohol because of their accounting process. This is actually the moment to put their team's time towards things that will actually differentiate them. We're also seeing the rise of do-it-yourself technology. It used to be that so much finance technology required a graduate degree in computer science. That is no longer the case. Most of the technology is low and no code. It has such a low barrier to entry, which makes its adoption easier for our teams.
And what does that mean in terms of the kinds of tools we'll be developing with this DIY technology? Well, for most of us, it's going to come in the form of some sort of AI, artificial intelligence. What we're going to see happen in our organizations is that machines will come to dominate decision-making in our organizations. Now, they're not going to take away or take over all of the most important or complicated decisions, but the bulk of the routine, everyday financial decisions that we make in our organizations over the next 5 years will be handed over to machines. And what that means for our staff is that they will now be monitoring, managing, stewarding a workforce of AI agents that are acting on their behalf every single day. Now, hopefully, what that should mean is that actually frees up some of our staff to help us respond to the regulatory pressures that we will be under. We expect to see over the next 5 years what we call an era of discontinuous regulatory change. It will be hard to predict, and we already see it happening. The US and the EU are moving in different directions on key regulatory schemes, and closer to home, the UK and the EU are even showing signs of diverging philosophies and regulations. But it's not just the direction that these schemes are heading, it's the speed at which they can change that makes this hard. We've seen in recent elections how quickly regulatory schemes can change overnight. And what that means is that we need to have a workforce that is localized and nimble and agile, ready to respond to these new regulatory pressures.
So we've talked about the technological changes. We've talked about the regulatory changes. And we're going to talk about the organizational changes. As we're working more and more with technology, that means we're working less and less with one another. That means we're going to see fewer human connections between each other. Do you have a best friend at work? Did you before? This might seem like a really strange question for a CEO and finance executive conference, but we've found time and time again that when we have close human connections with our colleagues, there are concrete business outcomes. Employee engagement goes up. We put our discretionary effort towards our jobs more. It makes a difference for our organizations. We're also seeing a finance talent crash. We know there are statistically fewer graduates coming out of universities with finance and accounting degrees. Now, most of the CFOs I talk with are not concerned about this because they recognize that the people they want on their teams, the skills that they want on their teams, will change in the next 5 years. And for the eighth force, we're seeing maximally matrixed organizations. That's a tongue twister for first thing in the morning. We know that almost 3/4 of CFOs are owning parts of the business outside of finance. We also know that our teams are working with IT, with sales, with the business in ways they haven't. This provides opportunities, but it can also slow us down, right? Collaborative overload can make our work more burdensome exactly at the moment we need to be more agile. So these 8 forces, they will fundamentally reshape who we are as finance leaders in the next 5 years. These are things that have already started to come and will only continue to evolve. It would be tempting to try to tackle each and every one of these. And as you go through the next few days at the conference, we have sessions on each and every one of these. But today, where Clem and I want to go for the rest of the conversation is on something that underpins all of this.
And that is your identity, both as a leader and your ability to leverage identity as a leadership tool. In fact, it's probably the most underutilized tool in your leadership toolbox. Now, why focus on identity? Well, identity will determine how you and your finance colleagues protect and grow the enterprise through these turbulent times. See, there's something deeper underneath all of these forces. It's very tempting, as Mallory said, to think about all of the technology changes, the process changes, the structural changes that need to happen. But even if you mastered all of those, it would not be enough. We have to recognize that the very definition of what it means to be a finance professional and who is a finance professional is changing. That's going to be very hard for our teams and our people. And it's very important that as CFOs, we take an active leadership role in driving that identity change to something productive for the new environment. So, what are we really talking about here? Well, what we want to show you is that there's a group of CFOs that are tackling this identity problem head on and utilizing it as a tool. And we call these CFOs catalyst CFOs. Now, that word catalyst is, of course, very intentional here. If you think back to some of your chemistry courses, remember that a catalyst is an agent that initiates change in others while retaining some of its critical properties. Not everything is going to change about finance, but many major things will. And these catalyst CFOs, they have a different playbook that they use to protect and grow their organizations in turbulent times. Catalyst CFOs prioritize financial flexibility in their organizations. That means their enterprise is positioned and ready to jump on opportunities that come up quickly and unpredictably. Catalyst CFOs are also very intimately involved in business operations. They engineer change in business operations that's needed for more profitable operations. And finally, catalyst CFOs provide a very clear investment thesis to their business colleagues on what the organization needs to be and do in the new operating environment in order to thrive.
Let me give you an example. You can look at the picture and you can probably take a pretty quick guess that we're about to talk about COVID. In the very early days of COVID, we saw a Guardian response. It's kind of reasonable, right? We didn't know what was going on. We focused on cash management. We drew down our credit lines to secure cash on hand. We revised our cash flow forecasts to daily or weekly instead of quarterly. From a cost control perspective, we deferred CapEx unless it was absolutely essential. We negotiated with our landlords, our vendors, our suppliers, pretty much anyone we could find for revised payment terms. But pretty quickly, we saw something interesting. We saw CFOs that took a catalyst approach, didn't stop all spending. In fact, they invested in places that mattered. They invested in cloud systems and collaboration platforms that allowed for remote work. They also reprioritized their budgets. They moved away from travel and real estate and towards things like digital customer engagement. They figured out how to spend and invest in areas that mattered in the new environment.
And in fact, we think that you might have already suspected this kind of a change was necessary. I've got a couple of rather shocking data points for you here. When we surveyed CFOs at the end of last year, 79% of them, huge majority, said that they felt their employees needed to update the way they see their jobs. And for all of my non-CFO finance leaders in the room, I apologize, I have another shocking number for you. An even higher number of your bosses said that you all needed to update the way you see your jobs, 83% to be exact. So, what are we talking about here? This is an opportunity for the CFO to bring their leadership team along with them.
So there's nothing quite like hearing that you need to update your job. We're going to give you some specifics here about what that looks like. Corporate controllers, we have already said we are seeing the end of transactional customization. That means your team doesn't need to spend time on the materiality thresholds and perfecting the close process like you have done before. But the organization actually really needs you right now. They need you to orchestrate the flow of financial information across systems.
And for all my FP&A leaders, you no longer just run budgeting and forecasting processes for the enterprise. You now identify, quantify, and grow a sustainable and profitable business advantage for the organization.
And finance transformation leaders, what we're talking about today means a fundamental shift in everything about how finance works, our organizational structures, the roles on our teams, the ways of working. The CFO needs you to be their right hand, to be that pragmatic visionary who can both figure out where we're going and how to get us there.
And what we're saying this morning is that identity is your best tool to bring in these changes, right? As CFOs, we have to take active control of this identity change to drive the organizational change that we want to see. Now, what's interesting, to take it out of the world of finance just for a moment, is that actually this relationship between identity and performance is really well studied. In the world of competitive athletics, sports psychologists have a measure that they call the Athletic Identity Measurement Scale. And it quantifies how strongly an individual sees themselves as an athlete. And across numerous studies, the results are the same. Individuals who identify more strongly as an athlete perform better. They're less likely to get injured, they're faster to recover from injury, and they stick with harder training for longer. And this isn't just an accident of, well, the better athletes score better on the AIMS test. This is actually causative. When mediocre athletes change their identity, they perform better. Their identity is determinative of their performance. Now, of course, we don't all know a lot of professional athletes that we can go and ask about this in person, right? But we all at least have athletic friends, right? Those are the friends, as you think about them, that are always showing up to coffee in the latest workout wear, blabbing on about whatever their latest workout fad is. They're always posting about it on social media, making you feel bad about yourself for not exercising. But we have to give these friends credit. They are still eating right and exercising when the rest of us may not be. Dry Jan was a long time ago, right? And what is it that they've figured out? Well, what they've figured out is that their commitment to their habits comes from their identity. See, the hardest part of getting in shape, unfortunately, isn't just doing the exercise with our bodies. It's dealing with what's in our minds. It's when we wake up tired or sore or it's raining outside, right? What's the choice that we make? Do we go for that run or not? If we see ourselves as athletic or healthy, we're that much more likely to go on that run. That run identifies us as an athlete, and the cycle begins. So this is what our friends have figured out. And what we need to do is create a similar cycle for our finance professionals as well.
We don't even need to step out of our organizations to see how much identity matters. Think about our colleagues in other functions. We're going to talk specifically today about our colleagues in IT. If you think back 10 years ago, they were responsible for the actual computers, and they were usually stuck in the basement. If you dared walk into an IT department about 10 years ago, you would have seen a poster proudly referring to them as the Tower of No. It was proudly displayed if you dared to go down there. But something interesting happened about 10 years ago as automation and cloud computing became the core of their work. How IT professionals began to identify themselves had to change. Now at Gartner, we spend a lot of time studying IT professionals. Those individuals who didn't change their identity, they retired or were fired. There really wasn't an option there. Those who did change are now critical members of our leadership team.
So where does this sort of self-driven or self-created identity change really come from? Well, the interesting thing is that science can now explain the mechanics of changing your identity actively. And to summarize the research very briefly, in order to change our identity, we need to change our habits. Those things we do every day. Many of the decisions that we make as leaders are really more habits than they are decisions, if we're honest. And the relationship between these two works on a loop. If we act in a way that aligns with our new chosen identity and are validated for it, then we come to own that identity, and that identity reinforces further commitment to those good and healthy habits.